Hello everybody and welcome to the Blatantly Biased Racing Podcast. I of course am Jason, who always get the podcast name right, along with Casual, who never does. And we're joined today by a wonderful guest who, if you've been on X, formerly known as Twitter, you probably follow because he is one of the kings of telling you about aero along with Scarbs. Joined by the wonderful Dr. Obbs. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thanks, Casual, Jason, for having me on. I'm ready to be blatantly biased. I've been accused of this many times, and I am actually a co-host of a podcast called Breaking Bias. So I'm in this weird sort of in-between space. I'm in a moral dilemma, but I'm going to get biased for you guys today.
Perfect. And of course, we'll put the link to the podcast in the description
below. By the way,
along with
I think at least twice or thrice when I've actually got the name wrong, I actually called it Breaking Bias.
You did,
so that's been the So yeah.
No, you guys are blatantly, you're like the opposite of my Breaking Bias podcast. Yeah. You're like the antithesis. You're just biased.
Yeah, we also like to wind people up here. So if you are annoyed by this podcast, make sure to subscribe to make sure more people can get annoyed by the podcast.
And if you aren't, still do that. Subscribe someone else who gets annoyed.
Yeah, you know, if you subscribe, it actually takes money from my account. So hit it as hard as you can.
That's it. Yeah. If you hate Jason, subscribe.
All right.
Okay, by the way, docs, thanks for coming on, by the way. It's been, I think we've had a conversation for a few, I think it was a back and forth in December, the last time we had. So,
yeah, and I think Jason reached out once before, a long time ago, I think.
Probably
Jason.
for Wheel Sports, which I've since axed. But yeah, probably for that.
Yeah. So he's moved on to better things, by the way.
Less subscribers, but, you know, better things.
Yeah, sometimes you got to go backwards to go forwards.
Yeah, I just got sick of having to actually do work, so this seemed easier.
Yeah.
Casual does all the work.
Yeah.
Seems like it.
That's
the
a nice
Indian
deal.
guy.
And gets no credit.
Just outsource it.
Yeah, that was the idea.
Yeah.
The Irish guy being lazy with the Indian guy doing all the work is basically your perfect stereotype. So.
Perfect. So we can not only be biased, but we can also be racist on this podcast.
Yes, 100%.
100%.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Nothing is off
This
limits.
shouldn't be problematic for me at all.
Or for YouTube's monetization policies. But anyway.
Good luck.
Yeah. So where do you want to kick off today? Casual, you've done all the work of planning this, so I'll let you start.
By the way, just a brief, I mean, I don't think a lot of people, even for me, I don't really know your background as such. So can you just give a brief for the fans and for us as well?
Yeah, who am I? So people can be like, hey, why should we listen to this idiot?
Yeah. And we don't want your social security number and other details.
Yeah.
That's for later.
We've already gone over this, Casual. I'm not giving you my social security number. You're not going to know my first pet's name either. All the security questions. No, I'm Dr. Obbs. The doctor's in there because I have my PhD. I got my PhD in bachelor's, master's, and PhD, all in mechanical engineering. But once I got to master's and doctorate, I started specializing in fluid dynamics. And the master's topic was actually really cool. I did research study on like inhaled medicines, like aerosol sprays and things like that into the human lungs. And I have a wonderful little cough right now. So that's obviously my research is not working. But my PhD was more on like multi-phase fluid dynamics and things like that. So I've always been a fan of motorsports ever since I was a kid. I think the first race I ever went to was in San Antonio here in the States. It was an IMSA race, and I got to see the Porsche 929s, I think it was, that they were running back then. And I was like instantly hooked. It's always been a car guy. I was on the Formula SAE team in college, so we built our own little small Formula car. I was on suspension team because I hadn't totally fallen in love with aerodynamics at that point. But it wasn't until I got into like master's, PhD, I started teaching like aerodynamics courses as part of my graduate studies. I was teaching like Aero Lab and started to really get into it, and then started to kind of marry together aerodynamics and motorsports into one thing. I didn't get active on X really until like 2018 or 2019. And then after that, I just started making tech content. Try to branch out from aerodynamics as well as much as I can, although that is really where my passion is because of my background. But, I know a fair bit about suspension dynamics and things also because of some of my history. I don't work in motorsports, so I always find it funny when people like contact me and they're like, hey, so how can I get a job in F1? I'm like, well, I don't work in F1. But I do know quite a few people who work in F1 along the way. And that's, I think, one of the ways that I've grown a lot within the sport has just been meeting people and not being afraid to like ask questions and learn things and kind of take that technical understanding that I have in aerodynamics, fluid dynamics, and really kind of combine it with the application knowledge of how they apply it then in motorsports and sort of work backwards from there. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I have my own podcast, which is called Breaking Bias Podcast. Like I said, which is the antithesis of this one. Now, yeah. And that's good fun. My co-host Molly is a powertrains expert. So we really just kind of like balance each other out so well. I do the aero. She's got a lot of the powertrain stuff. And yeah, I love motorsports. I try not to be biased, but like I said, I will be biased for you guys on this podcast.
I'm just annoyed that Casual brought someone on who actually knows what he's talking about, because now we're going to be showing up.
Usually it's just vibes with people with no wheel knowledge or technical knowledge.
The thing is, before this one we had Josh Revel on. He's also, he's a big YouTuber. And even then he said the same thing. So basically he's tokened a few comments. He continues to regurgitate again and again and again. The thing is, Jason and I, we don't know anything. It's basically, so it's entirely on you.
Yeah. No, and the thing is, I love it when people, I say I love it, but I laugh when people say stuff like, oh, you're the expert or whatever. I'm not an expert. I know a thing or two about a thing or two, but there's a lot I don't know. And I just ask questions and try and learn as much as possible. Doing the podcast has really helped. Having an opportunity to talk with, former F1 aeros or talk with got a chance in a previous podcast I was on to talk with Mike Law, who's kind of the head of, suspension dynamics for McLaren Racing. And then that was like 2 years ago. So back then, they were still an incredibly slow brick. But, just to hear like all the things that they were doing, obviously not in specifics because they can't speak to specifics, and then seeing where they've come now has been fascinating. McLaren definitely opened a lot of people's eyes for sure.
Definitely. I think we'll stick to what I like to call the Ralph Schumacher method, which is if you just make enough predictions, some of them will come true, and then you see them.
Yeah. Throw enough darts on the dartboard, eventually you'll hit a bullseye.
I think it's I was going to say the advantage sometimes as well. Like I'm from a computer science background, so data analytics, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we get predictions right. Well, I get predictions right just purely based on seeing patterns. And I'm like, I had no idea that was going to be right, but it seemed right, so let's go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty much what predictive analytics is, right? It's like just taking past data, trending out things, and then, similar computational fluid dynamics and fluid dynamics, all the CFDs that they do in Formula One, it's the same kind of thing. It's like, you're using science and stuff to understand how energy is like convected and dissipated throughout a domain, but it's using data from upstream to kind of propagate that information downstream. And if you have crap data upstream, then you get crap data downstream. And I guess it's no different if you're doing like analytics. If you've got crap data on the front end, you're going to get crap data on the back end.
Yeah. I had that problem with clients before, passing in bad data. It's like, this is never going to give us a good result.
Clients are always the problem, right?
Yeah, I tried to stop working with them, but unfortunately you need money sometimes. So,
that's fair. Most of the time when it comes to Formula 1, there's only one prediction that you can always say. When it's Pitt and it's Ferrari, they're basically going to put the wrong tires almost every time. So
Ferrari's strategy is going to suck. Max Verstappen's going to crash into somebody.
Yeah, I don't understand why the rest of the teams don't simply do whatever the opposite of Ferrari's strategy is, because then they'd win every time. It seems like an easy solution.
I do have to give it to Ferrari a little bit. They've certainly gotten better.
Yes.
On the strategic front, but they do make some interesting calls from time to time.
They should have just followed Occam's razor, which is you just get a French team boss in, and that seems to fix everything. It's just easy solution.
That's the solution.
Yeah.
The
And by the way,
solution is we will put someone French in the position and he will be very good.
So then the monkey.
he might. So, by the way, just talking about Ferrari in general, what's your take on the whole? In terms of they're completely changing the suspension once again. I mean, they ended the season quite brilliantly in 2024. Doing wholesale changes, heading into a new season where, I mean, look, it's not been that long that McLaren ended the 2012 season as the fastest car and moved into 2023 and they completely revamped everything and basically sucked after that since, I mean, for a decade, to be honest. Applying that approach of revolution compared to evolution, something that has been the case, especially in such prescriptive regulations, how do you think that approach actually is going to pay out for them?
I mean, it's always difficult to say for sure because we don't know exactly what the scope of their changes are. But I think this comment kind of applies whether you're talking about motorsports or you're talking about anything else in business, is that if you don't innovate, you will be left behind. And I think it's like 10,000 times more true in Formula One that if you're just standing still, you're going to get passed. I think it's one of the things that Red Bull tried to do this year. When you saw the scope of the changes, first thing they rolled out with was kind of the shark intake, which has the overbite design. And that was a revelation to people. They're like, oh, wow, this is amazing. Now, since then, a lot more teams on the grid have this overbite design. They kind of brought back the shoulder gully design that the W14, I think, was the one that originally had unveiled. And sorry, you'll have to edit that out. I told you I have a bad cough.
Don't worry about it.
And so
we keep worse things in, by the way. So
yeah, okay, good. So they brought back the shoulder gullies. They took a lot more chances in the floor, which we couldn't see, but this is just what I was told. They split the intake a bit. They put a little intake by the driver's head. So they did a lot of like very innovative things, and I think they were doing it all in the name of like innovating to gain performance and not get passed. Unfortunately, what that put them down a path was a path towards where they found instability. Now, I don't think the instability came from the shoulder gullies. I don't think it came from the little intakes by the driver's head. I don't think it came from the shark intake. I think it was from some of the innovative things they were doing in the floor. That kind of took them to a peaky point. Now, circling back to your question on Ferrari's emphasis and focus on suspension, I think, is a right place where you really want to innovate first because of the fact that these cars are heavily limited by the dynamic stabilities of the aero platform. So we have a podcast that's about to release that we taped with aerodynamicist.
That's the fourth time, by the way, you're plugging in your podcast.
I'm just gonna
let him plug
counting. I'm gonna keep plugging it. But we interviewed an aero in sports car racing, and one of the things that he told us is he said you would much rather create an aerodynamic map, which is your performance map. You would much rather create an aerodynamic performance map that's predictable and steady over one that is just like peaky and performing at the highest level. And so, and they have, more suspension dynamic solutions than Formula One does. Just to say that if you can innovate on the suspension side and you can find gains there, then it starts to really be able to unlock the aerodynamic ceiling. Where a lot of teams, Red Bull, I think it was, Mercedes was, again, still sort of hitting the top end of this a little bit, where you're starting to find instability when you're pushing performance, but you don't have the dynamic control gains. So I think Ferrari's taken the right approach. I've heard rumors that Red Bull is doing something similar with their rear suspension, that they're going to be kind of redoing the whole thing. I think this is the right place where you're going to innovate. And then if you can get that right, then I think at that point, now you can start to try to pile on more performance with the aero. Yeah. So the aero is limited by suspension. So find gains in the suspension if you can. That might be worth the risk.
I think as well, if I'm not wrong, Ferrari have already changed their suspensions
multiple times.
Twice. Is it? Mm-hmm. I mean, just maybe this isn't the reason, but one of the things I was thinking about when I was hearing this is there could be a few things. One, maybe testing both of these things have given them a better understanding in their CFD and wind tunnel, and therefore they kind of know now how to mix things together more. I know in a simple idiot way of saying things, but I think one of the other things as well we need to keep in mind is a lot of the way that this aero works is going to carry over into 2026. So perhaps this is a good way to kind of map that understanding too onto 2026, because even though there's reduced, is it 30% reduction in the Venturi tunnels or Venturi effect, I think?
I mean, they're going to be flat-ish floors, so they're not going to be Venturi style. So essentially, like these floors, the reason why they work so well is when you think of a Venturi, it's like you've got an inlet throat, and then you've got this throat section, which is closest to the ground, and then you've got the very long, gradual diffuser exit. Now, if you draw that, like this inlet throat, short bottom section, and then exit, it looks like a wing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's effectively a wing.
Yep.
So now what they're going to be doing is they're going to have a much more steeper inlet throat, and then it's going to be flat, and then it's going to be a short diffuser. So now that's like almost like a stepped wing, right? So it's still ground effect. But you're right. There's going to be significantly less downforce from the floors because of the fact that you're not kind of using this natural kind of Venturi style design.
Yeah. So I wonder if perhaps this is kind of a balance of figuring out things for 2026 while also getting to peak performance in these, because they will share some, as you said, they'll share some level of similarities, just a lot less in the floor, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, suspension-wise, I need to be honest, I need to like study more on the 2026 regulations, at least what we know so far from the tech regs. On what the suspension systems will look like. We've got the engine regs or the power unit regulation. So we already know some of the changes that are going there with the MGUH and all this stuff going away. But then on the suspension side of things, the biggest change that they made coming into this regulation set was removing the inerters. And so then it just went back to your typical kind of heave, rocker, torsion, bar, like all the, your typical kind of mechanical.
Old school mechanical platform.
Yeah, old school mechanical. And so what I'm wondering is, and based off what you're saying there, Jason, I mean, if this is just translating over into 2026, and you're right, anything that you can understand as far as dynamic platform control from this regulation set, you can also apply to the next one. I think that what inherently makes Venturi style floors really good is that they can generate like peak performance load, but that's also what makes them very bad. Because that's why, like, for instance, we had the issues with the porpoising or the bouncing, because these Venturi style floors, they're very rear biased to where the diffuser kick line is, which means they generate their peak suction at that point, which is almost like aligned with kind of the rear suspension. And so naturally you're generating a lot of load right there locally. It's right on where the rear suspension is. And then now things get out of phase, you get porpoising. Whereas these kind of flatter style Venturi floor or non-Venturi floors are a little different. You're still going to have kind of a peak at where that kick line is for the diffuser, but it's going to be more spread out because the floor is kind of flat-ish.
Right.
So I'm thinking that probably teams are going to run more rake in 2026, because what you want to do when you have that kind of flat-ish floor is try to almost kind of create a diffuser earlier from where that kick line is, and kind of try and bias your aero center a little bit more forward or backwards depending on what you want to get to.
which is
so they
something
might
that
run more or less rake.
Red Bull was very much a big part of, or pioneer
Yeah.
of, in the last regulation.
2021, 2020, yeah. That car was
Yeah.
visibly, it had a
The
lot
high
of
rake.
rake.
For anyone
Yeah.
watching who doesn't know what that means, it's just like if you see the front is
The
lower
car
down
is
and the back
this way,
is
basically.
kind of pitched
Mhm.
forward.
The
Yeah.
rear ride height is higher than the front ride height, exactly.
Yeah,
And
precisely.
Mercedes were very much the
scientifically
low.
speaking.
Yeah, Mercedes were the low rake, and then basically everyone else, I think, apart from Mercedes and the pink Mercedes in 2020, basically everyone else was kind of low rake or high rake, right? Everyone followed Red Bull, I think. If I
Yeah,
remember.
but nothing like Red Bull. Red Bull was
No,
quite
they were
visible. It was
yeah.
weirdly visible the way
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
actually operating. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and they,
that's
whenever you have very short diffusers, teams are going to more naturally do that.
Do that. Okay.
They're going to try to make the diffuser bigger and longer by introducing rake. They have recently, though, in the aero updates to the technical regs, from what I could tell, increased the diffuser volume slightly. It looked to me like. But it still is very short compared to the current diffusers that we have now, which are huge. So
Yeah.
I still think they're going to run some rake, maybe not as much rake as they might have otherwise.
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting.
But when it comes to primarily in 2024, one of the bigger issues that came from Red Bull was the inability to ride the curbs, right? Does it cement from the car being run too low compared to others? Was that one of the reasons why they couldn't really hit the curbs the way other teams like McLaren and Ferrari? Ferrari was probably in a way, it was the benchmark on those particular regions. Was that the reason why this happened, or was it something else?
So here's how I understand it. The way I understand it is the development path that they went down brought them into a point where when I was mentioning like a peaky aero map that works only in a very small kind of window, their aero development took them in that direction to where what they previously had, it's a bit hard to say for sure because 2022 and 2023 especially, was so dominant from Red Bull. They had so much pace in hand. I really don't think they ever needed to find the optimal setup because of the fact that they just had pace in hand. Like they could absorb it. Then when the grid closed up, now they needed to start to find the performance. We saw in 2023 in Singapore, right, that even then the car was just crap going over the curbs. So the way I understand it is that they developed themselves into kind of this very narrow working window, and Pierre Wash and everybody else has said this. And what that means is that now if you have a narrow performance window, as you go through the track, undulations, cornering, mid corner, exit corner, corner entry, all these different points, you've got different dynamics, suspension, loading. And so you're going to get more or less roll, more or less pitch, heave. And the car doesn't want to do that. Or you don't want the car to do it when you have a peak aero map. You want it to just stay level.
Yep.
So what do? You run the car incredibly stiff and tight so that it resists all that motion. But the problem is that whenever you go over a curb or something that's going to give you like a kind of an instantaneous impact force, then what that's going to do is that's going to introduce a shock or a displacement to your system. Yeah. And because your system is dynamically controlled in such a stiff and rigid way, you're going to have very little damping or dissipation of that. So that instantaneous kind of impact is going to create a much bigger impact and load onto your platform than other people's who are maybe running a bit softer. And that could do a number of things. It could take your car not just out of the window, but like really out of the window for that minute. Or it could actually impart such a load that literally your tires will like not be able to absorb that displacement differential, and you'll lose grip because the tires will get completely unloaded. Mm-hmm. And if you're going over a curb at any high rate of speed, that's it. You need the grip while you're going over the curb. So, and it's going to introduce like kind of a nervousness to the car, to the feel that the drivers are just not going not going to like and they're not going to trust. So that's the way I understand it. The way I understand it was that it was kind of around the aero, and the aero requiring them to have to run the car in a dynamic kind of control place where it had to be very stiff. And this now made it unable to absorb the shock loading you would get whenever you go over curves.
Yep.
And that's so these were the areas that were targeted when the Austin upgrade came primarily.
Sorry, say that again.
So these were the areas that got targeted when the Austin upgrade came, because that was the first time we saw at least a semblance of the gap closing. I mean, Max got pole in that particular race as well.
Yeah, so they basically walked back to a lot of their aero updates. One of the things that was very visible was right there in the boat, which when you're looking in the diffuser, and when the diffuser ramps down and you've got the back portion of the floor, and everybody's got these like cool little designed kind of aero surfaces that sort of go up the boat, the very rear portion, and then it's kind of like the rear transmission, the transmission case and everything sits right there. So depending on your transmission case design, your aero is going to have to kind of fit around it. Well, everybody worked very hard to make the transmission cases as small as possible so that they could maximize that aero volume. And so as they were maximizing that aero volume, everything was getting nice and sculpted in that region and very slim. And what that allowed you to do is optimize the rear load performance. So like the downforce and kind of that rear section. But the problem with that is, again, you kind of get this peaky sort of loading performance profile. And then anytime that your rear ride height changes, then if your aero is not able to sort of accommodate for that change, then what will happen is you'll have an instantaneous loss of force and the car will feel incredibly nervous. So one of the first things they did is they simplified that area. If you saw it, they just kind of like took a piece and glued it up in there, you know, and it was a very sort of a simple, almost like a triangular design boat. And so they walked back all that, you know, sort of aero sculpting and performance.
That's months of work.
Years.
That's gone.
Yeah. Years. To get to that point, it's like over a year.
Yeah, I guess you have to go right back to start taking variables out and figuring out where things go wrong. So
Mercedes had to do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
They kind of they walked everything way back and they just kind of started from scratch.
One of the interesting things I heard from a Mercedes engineer, I can't remember where I heard it. He might have been on a podcast with Blake from X as well. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was from that. But anyway, he was discussing a lot of the things that make sense from what you're talking about with Red Bull as well, which was Mercedes have found this particular reg set so difficult because their way of development kind of goes against what you were saying, which is you want that wide window and then kind of develop inwards to a peak performance. And he said Mercedes had traditionally always started with peak performance and worked out, whereas Red Bull, as he understood it, started with a wide operating window and worked in, which helped them kind of in the start of this reg set, which made sense. So I mean, guess Mercedes going back there,
Yeah, I mean, depending on what you want to believe, and I've talked to a few people to make me at least feel comfortable in saying this, in that like the W13 when it was first unveiled was a downforce monster.
Yeah.
It was like,
as well,
it was incredibly well performing, and this is exactly like what you're saying there, Jason. It's like they just chased that peak performance. They found it, and it was a downforce monster. The only problem is that it was just not controllable in the way that
the purposing was massive issue even in that case as well. And I think that's why Mark Hughes was the first guy who reported that whatever. Because we had one of our reporters in I think it was in Bahrain at the time, when the second test they unveiled the car. It wasn't unveiled in the first test, by the way, if you guys remember.
Yeah.
It was unveiled in the second test where there was no side pods. There were no side pods, and the buzz that was there around Mercedes at the time, like everyone expected this to be something. I mean, I think that's why that whole tweet where it's what was it? This no side pods is the best innovation in something.
Yeah, from F1 Jordan.
F1 Jordan.
I remember at the time, like I was running Wheel Sports at the time, and the channel was very much like news. And at the time, I was constantly like chatting to various engineers from different teams that I'd like met through different things, or I'd gone to university with, and or just met through things. They would always just tell me these random facts, but keep it loose enough that I couldn't kind of lead back to them. And the amount of them who said the same thing, which was just, yeah, it sounds like Mercedes have this like downforce monster, to put it in your terms, as you said. And then Red Bull, we're just constantly like, I don't think that's going to work though. And it was interesting to see where this would go. So I was like, this is going to be fun.
Who said, right, that we trialed this model, but and I think he stopped short of saying that we don't think it will work.
What I found interesting at the time was, it was as soon as Newey came out and said, I hadn't looked at that, I was like, that's either a really good sign or a really bad one. Because if they've thought of something that Newey hasn't, it's either incredibly good or it's so terrible that his mind went, that won't work. It turned out to be the latter. But
I think from the first time that I saw it, I was not convinced myself, and I came out and publicly said it a couple times, but it was less so related to the issues that I think they ultimately ended up having around kind of the downforce relative to the platform control, but more so related to the fact that you really need the side pods to help deflect and manage the front tire wake and kind of push it out. And everything that my eyes were drawn to with that was like, how are you doing that? Because they got this little like cis wing, which is kind of down and out washing, but I don't see kind of pressurization profiles that would come from something like that would be strong enough to just be able to deflect the front tire wake. And
it was there for more legality, by the looks of it, than anything else, right?
Yeah, I mean, they had to have a cis cover for sure, but I think they were then using that cis cover to also, because the way that it was shaped, kind of downwash and outwash to try to help with that. But I mean, that's all in the past, but at the end of the day, it didn't work.
No, and it's left them behind for a long time with a very kind of weird balancing car that it still seems a lot of the time. I said this on a recent, I think it was after Vegas when they had the 1-2 that I said to you, Casual. I was like, brilliant that they got a 1-2, but what concerns me is basically the beforehand, like, oh, why were you so fast? Well, we don't know. And it seemed like a genuine, like, we have no clue. Like, I think it's because it was colder. Sure.
I mean, that was what everyone said, right? That it's cold, Mercedes is going to do well. And that
then
was it.
They win in the heat and they're like, oh, we don't know what happened here. It's just like,
they were on pole, right? In the very next race in Qatar again. When the whole George and Max thing happened.
He was technically on pole. Yes. Which got some arguments on Twitter.
I mean, but what that goes to show you though is just how technically complex the sport is. I mean, you've got some of the greatest motorsport minds on these teams, and they still can't wrap their heads around some of the dynamics that they're seeing. Yeah. Which for somebody like me who's really into kind of the technical side of the sport, that's really cool to see. Because even when I'm confused about things, it makes me at least feel somewhat human, because I'm like, even the teams are a little bit confused in these areas.
These guys have all the tools and everything at their disposal. And
they've got CFD, they've got all the stuff that I'm just guessing on. And then even Red Bull taking the wrong direction, from a team that's been so successful to now go the wrong direction. It just shows you that like nobody's immune to this potential. I mean, including McLaren. I think for the longest time, most of the feedback I got from some of the grid people that I spoke with was based off of the spy shots that they saw of the McLaren floor. They felt like the McLaren floor was kind of the most simple of all the floors, but they've always felt like the suspension dynamic control or dynamic control of the McLaren via its suspension design has always been the best for McLaren. I mean, even from the start. So it was only a matter of time once they got kind of the aero around it that it was going to be a performing car.
I do want to ask about McLaren in a minute, but I just have one question that maybe is on your list, Casual. Like,
go for it.
I never prepare.
I know.
There was a lot of talk, obviously, that I kind of batted away at the start, which was, as soon as Newey left, these problems came about, right? Now, in terms of F1, the reason I just immediately went, look, that's ridiculous, is because decisions don't basically
the
aren't
lead time
displayed.
is big. What he's trying to
aren't
say is the lead time is big.
Thank you for correcting my English. I should really work on that. I'm Irish. We do speak English. No. But yeah, the lead times are so long that I basically assumed Newey's movement wasn't anything to do with that. However, there was a lot of rumours afterwards that there were kind of differences between Vacher and Newey in where they wanted to go. Given that you kind of constantly are inside on these things and knowing about these things, what's your take on that? Do you think there's any truth to that?
There was definitely truth to them being at odds in certain parts of the car. I've been sworn to secrecy, so I cannot tell you exactly which parts of the car that
Don't worry, no one will watch this one.
You can say whatever you want. Anyway.
If you want, we just won't upload it. I'm interested. No, it's fine.
Yeah, no, but there are parts of the car, yes, where there was there were disagreements for sure. The feeling that I get is that inside Red Bull there is this culture of innovation, and the culture of innovation is more like, you got a great idea, show me that it works, like, run it in the CFD or whatever, bring me the data and show me. And anybody can do that at any level in Red Bull, is that if you got a great idea, instead of just going and asking for permission to do something, it's like, come to me with data, show me your idea and how it works. And then, if you can kind of convince the guys, then, maybe you'll get some time to do a wind tunnel run. Okay. And so they do have kind of this innovation mindset. Now, after the RB18, I think Newey's involvement in the car design became less than it was in the RB18 and became more of like an advisory kind of a role. And certainly everybody would go talk to him and get, if they got into a really challenging situation, seek out his advice, and he would be able to find, some development pathways that could be potentially good that people could then go explore. So from what I hear, he was very good at kind of like injecting like really great ideas that would kind of lead them down a path. But then ultimately the development of that path and the maturation of the design into a solution was done by the team. Yeah. And that's the team that is there.
So that's precisely what was said and what pissed Newey and his wife off, kind of, when they said that he's not necessarily, because just for people who are watching who didn't understand, RB18 is your 2022 Challenger. So that was the car that was the baseline from which the rest of the cars have been built. That was through Adrian Newey, and from there on he
focused on the suspension and the mechanics, as we talked about. That was kind of the key area that he took lead on, I think. Himself.
I mean, he had to. I mean, he was the only one who had been working on ground effect when it was there the last time around.
But it's Enrico Balbo and Pierre Vacher who then take the lead day to day. Right?
Yeah, and so if there is, let's say, a semblance of truth in that particular, whatever suggestions have been made, is that something that kind of triggered his departure from the team? Because the kind of contributions he made, I think he would ideally, I mean, from an individual perspective, he would think that his role in Red Bull having the kind of season it had in 2023, he probably thought that he was probably underappreciated, and that kind of led towards the exit or maybe some discontent within the team.
I mean, I can't speak to maybe any political things potentially that might have been going on or internal disagreements, but I do know that what I was told at one point around his involvement and then his kind of involvement in the RB17 was more his initiation, that he wanted to kind of branch out and try something new. But I think, yes, that there were some some kind of disagreements in certain areas, but I also believe that the RB17 was their attempt to try to keep Newey for longer, because he was at a point to where I think he was becoming a little
staled, burned out.
Yeah,
basically.
it was becoming a little stale, so we want to do something different. And I think that what that initiated was internally some thinking around what does Red Bull look like without Adrian Newey?
Yeah.
Who do we need? This is where you got the Washes and the Balbos and all these guys, and they start going out and seeking and getting really skilled people. And I think they were doing that with an eye on the future. Yep. Because they've already had to kind of pull Adrian Newey out of leaving once before.
Yeah.
And be like, well, now we need to take this seriously.
That's why I actually asked, because I think it was post Abu Dhabi, we had an interview with Horner, and he specifically talked about these things, that it was 2014 when, specifically when Vettel left. At the same time, Newey was very close. Actually, Horner was very close to leaving, and he was persuaded to stay by Marco. And then Newey was very close to moving to Ferrari as well. And even though Newey stayed, he also took a step back. I think he started working on the Valkyrie project, the Aston Martin thing, and it was more of it turned into a less of a day-to-day job, more of an advisory role, if I'm not wrong. And from there, according to Horner, now how much truth there is, but he said that from that point onwards, they'd been preparing for a future without Newey.
Yeah.
And
that's what I'd heard over the years as well, that like they knew this point was coming. I mean, obviously it was going to come at some point, so if you're long-term planning for the team, you have to think that way. I think there's one positive maybe of everything that happened over the past season, is that even though Newey had less of a day-to-day role kind of as we got into 2023 and the RB17, they had always been able to kind of count on him as like, oh, we can go to him if there's a problem, and he has that kind of base understanding of these regulations. Probably one of the highest understandings of anyone, just because of his history in the sport. But I think 2024 may be a blessing in disguise that they still managed to get that title. Thanks to Max, not so much Perez. Sorry, Perez. But they were able to kind of,
even though Checo was the best driver, right?
Yeah,
the man living in Mexico.
Best driver of all time. I don't want to be killed.
Checo fans hate me already, so I'm not going to say anything.
I have to be careful. I live in Mexico. I don't want to be hunted.
Yeah, you're
I am a Perez fan as well, but I got in trouble this year because I was like, look, even as a Perez fan, I genuinely can't defend him here. But
same.
I think the thing that will look good for them in the future is that at least this year they got to kind of stress test themselves, go through a really problematic time. What is going on with my English? Problematic time, and come back from it without Newey being on call. Because obviously by the time all these problems started to rear their heads, he was almost on gardening leave, kind of dealing with the RB17. So he wouldn't have been on beck and call to deal with them. So I think they probably needed that, especially going into 2026 when they've not only got aero to deal with, they've also got their engine to deal with. So they're going to have to kind of live in this post-Newey world fairly quickly. So it's probably good.
I think exactly. And for me, the biggest, I think the red flag came in Japan this season, because if you remember, we were coming off a Ferrari win at the time, and Red Bull was bringing a major upgrade. I expected Red Bull to be a bit more dominant, because I think it was 3 tenths ahead. I think Max was 3 tenths ahead, not massively ahead of the second non-Red Bull car. And that kind of ticked me the wrong way, because previous season in Suzuka only, I think the gap was around half a second. So you could see that. So you could see that on the same track, probably I think 3 to 4 months apart, the gap had shrunk significantly. And that was an upgraded Red Bull, and the upgrade for McLaren and Ferrari was supposed to come in the next race. And next race. Then there was China, and then there was Miami. So a couple of races later. And you could see that maybe not entirely things were going in the right direction. And at the time, Newey was part of the team.
And I think Jason's point around like Newey's ability to dig them out of issues was probably missed in 2024, when, he probably would have, based off of his understanding, been able to kind of dig them a bit quicker out of it than they did. Ultimately, they did dig themselves out of it. So Jason, your point is spot on that, that should instill some confidence in themselves that they can do it. There's plenty of people that learned under Newey for a very long time. Dan Fallows went over to Aston Martin, has been recently sort of pulled back from the role that he had previously with Aston Martin Racing. So it's not to say that, people who learn from Newey can be Newey. Because there's only one Newey. But at the same time, what is Newey going to be able to do at Aston Martin Racing? How much freedom is he going to be given to do the things that he wants to be able to do? Yeah. I think
if you can fire Lance Stroll, that would be a huge upgrade.
yeah, sadly not, I don't think.
That might be a part of something that might have to happen for them to get to where they want to go. But and who knows, maybe with Honda going to Aston Martin, if Max ever gets an itch, maybe he joins back up with his buddy. But
if Max gets called up for 2026 and they somehow have a title-winning car, Alonso is going to be the angriest man on the planet.
Oh no, he's either going to hunt down. He's either going to Canada or going to Netherlands, wherever Max lives.
He has waited a long time for another title-winning car.
I mean, the thing is, 2026 is going to be a complete reset. Yeah, but I still think that the power unit teams, or the teams that are strong in power units, Mercedes, Ferrari, I think are going to naturally kind of, and if you believe the rumors about Mercedes power unit for 2026 already making crazy numbers on the dyno, then maybe they are set up to be kind of at the front right off the bat. It probably won't be as aero-dominated as this regulation set is. But I also don't think it's going to be as PU dominated as people are saying it's going to be.
I've been saying this a long time.
Actually, this is the discussion that we've had quite a bit, because it's the bigger changes around. We are moving from a 20% electric to 50% electric, if I'm not wrong.
350 horsepower, right?
Yeah.
Kilowatts. Sorry.
Yeah. So IC will remain the same. At least the 50% part is going to remain the same. Again, the question marks are mostly around Audi, to an extent around Red Bull powertrain itself. Maybe those two powertrains do fall back a bit, at least in the beginning. But I doubt we are going to see either of these three, the big three right now, Honda, Ferrari, and Mercedes to a certain extent. I don't think the variance is going to be as big as maybe a lot of people are expecting right now.
Yeah, this is, after looking at it quite a bit, my take on it is just that I think that there will obviously be someone with the best engine. That goes without saying. But I think there'll be probably not a huge difference in performance between the best engine and the worst engine compared to, say, what we saw in 2014, where there was a huge difference. The only thing I've been thinking about recently that I think could be a problem for some of the teams, and where Mercedes in particular might have the advantage, is reliability, because they do have to switch completely to sustainable fuels, and that will make a difference in how the engine runs. And even when we saw the E10 and some reliability issues that caused with just some simple hoses and things for Red Bull in 2022, that can make a big difference. And reliability can cost the championship. So I agree. I don't think in performance we're going to see a huge difference, but reliability wise for new teams like Audi and for Red Bull, that could be where maybe that lack of experience plays a factor. Let's see though. Who knows?
I mean, I agree for sure. I think on the reliability front, that's something I've mentioned in other podcasts before, is that Red Bull powertrains has been kind of operating a bit autonomously. They're like Skunk Works, secret design in Milton Keynes. They literally are quarantined off from everybody else at the factory, and they're kind of doing their own thing. But they hired in a lot of people from Mercedes to be a part of that outfit, some high level people. So they've got some experience. But you're right, Jason. They need to get that core experience on the reliability front to be able to say that I know that these internal combustion engines are going to last for X number of duty cycles before we need to replace them or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm slightly a bit of a question mark for me is the fact that Christian Horner is also overseeing the RBBT project as well, which I mean he's led the team, he's led the Formula One team and operated that part. All right, at least leave the powertrain unit to someone else. It's just maybe he's taking too much on board.
He's just
for
trying
himself,
to get the finger out.
Yeah. I was waiting once the joke clicks.
That was a thumb.
So, yeah.
More like a thumb.
I mean, yeah. Oh, you saw it as well.
Oh god.
Oh god.
Don't
Yeah, I
mention
mean,
the war.
what nonsense was that? I mean, last year, this time, I think it was around this time Lewis announced that he was going to Ferrari, and within 2 weeks we had the whole Fingergate. So God bless Christian Horner.
You got to keep your thumb on the pulse always.
Yeah.
You know, usually.
By the way, how so?
We're
what
not
was
going to
going
actually
on?
go there, are we?
Yeah. Why not?
Oh god. I was excited for a technical podcast and not talking about some sort of harassment scandal, but here we go.
Not talking about fingers and thumbs.
We talk about everything, you know. We cover the entire rainbow, apparently. Anyways, it's just that. So whatever information I got from the Milton Keynes and even Jason had a few sources in there. What was the environment in Red Bull in those few months? Because again, the publications that were putting out stuff, I have it on good authority from where the leaks were. But the point is that the kind of impact it had on the team, and it just seemed that the entire thing got disrupted. As soon as the season started, you saw all these... It's basically you had Marco on one side and Horner on the other. It wasn't you can say it was a bit of a disjointed effort at the start of the season. I'm not entirely sure if that was the trigger for Newey, because I think he had a foot out of the door, and when the Aston Martin thing came, he went. I still think that Wheatley left because he hit the ceiling in Red Bull. I don't think there was any other.
Promoted.
Yeah, I said the same. Yeah,
I don't think that played a role. But for me, the worry was that once the team, at least in front of on television, on any other place, the entire world sees the team as a disjointed unit, and that kind of has an impact on whatever goes on back at the factory as well. So what did you get to know something that things were not working as well as they should have at the start of the season, and that played a role? Did that led to the kind of probably taking the wrong direction to something that happened ultimately?
I mean, the people that I spoke with, mostly I speak with the aero guys or a couple people trackside team. Trackside team and the aero guys that I spoke with, honestly, nobody felt fazed by anything that was in the media or anything that was being reported. People started talking about toxic work cultures and stuff like that. I know a couple of people on the electronic side as well. And it's like, everybody was like, I have no idea where this stuff is coming from because I don't see it. But I'm sure that there are some disgruntled people. There's some people that were probably connected with the people that were involved that got very upset. I'm sure, no doubt. But I think that there was just some very isolated, small fires versus a raging inferno, like people were trying to describe it as. It wasn't an uncontrolling fire, but Jos was obviously gonna step in there and try and stir it like he always does. To try to get his way.
As someone said at the time, they were like, well, Jos predicted this would happen. And I just turned around and said, it's easy to predict the house is going to burn down when you're the one pouring the fuel on it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't... That dynamic, I've never really been able to get much information around that side of things. People...
I'll tell you after the podcast.
Okay. Like I said, most of the people that I talk to, they're so isolated from all the rest of the drama because they're just in the downforce mines, or they're down there in the test pit or whatever, in the wind tunnel. Yeah. And they're just like so hyper focused on everything that they're doing. It's almost like they're robots.
Yeah.
And when I ask them things, they're like, where did you come up with that? And I'm like, yeah, that's like circulating on X. And they're like, what did I tell you about believing things you read on X?
Yeah, what I heard at the time was very much like the Milton. I think you said this as well at the time, Casual. It's like Milton Keynes and the factory, and everything I heard was just the factory, as you said, just getting on with it. And they're always very much behind Horner. Horner has a very kind of strong control over keeping things running at the factory. So, and as we know from Horner, his kind of method to his madness, whenever things go wrong or he gets called out on stuff, he does the Bill Clinton thing of just keeping the economy focused and forgetting about everything else, and that kind of plays into what you're saying. It's like, we'll just focus on the economy and not worry about Lewinsky outside and all the stuff going on, it's fine. So
whereas like the president and his cabinet might be yelling at each other,
exactly,
but like everybody else is okay.
Let's just keep going.
Yeah.
So, it's very insulated. It's an insulated working environment for sure.
I think this was bound to happen, though, right? We were always going to get something like this. Obviously not. I'm not saying it was bound. I'm not saying it was bound to happen that he was going to allegedly sexually harass someone. What I meant was it was bound to happen that we were going to get some sort of fire happening after Dietrich died, because there was a lot of people who would want to, take more control, gain a bit of a leg up. It was bound to have some sort of issue, and Horner has always had a kind of iron grip on that team, and I guess something clearly happened between him and Marco at some point, and it seemed to come after Porsche. The whole Porsche deal fell apart, which was strange, because as far as I understood, Marco was against the Porsche deal as well, but it seemed to come from that, so I'm not sure. Who knows what happened behind the scenes? Who knows?
It's just that whatever feedback I got was Horner is adored in the entire Milton Keynes. Like, he's looked up to because of he's been there since the beginning. I mean, again, Marco is also there, but Marco is someone. This
podcast has taken a very strange turn.
I know. Yeah, we'll get back on track. We usually don't, but there's still hope. It's just that the kind of feedback I got for both Marco and Horner was it was a bit. They are basically two polar opposites in terms of how employees look at them. Because Horner is someone who they look up to, Marco is someone they're scared of, and that kind of shows in the way they for various reasons. But it's just, I hope they get back on track. I'm slightly worried because as the season ended, the gap was a bit too big between at Abu Dhabi, where I think it was McLaren was in pole position, Ferrari was second, Max was around half a second off, if I'm not wrong, and that's on pace. That kind of gap, if you have to cover up during a winter, that takes a lot of work. That's something, it's interesting because
amazing technical stuff. So McLaren, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
We can chat shit about rumors anytime. We've got someone who understands technical stuff.
Yeah, exactly. That's
why
why
enjoy this.
See, just look at the segue, by the way. It was brilliant. Seamless.
Jason doesn't do any preparation work, but he's king at segues.
Yeah. I don't have hair, but I'm good at thinking on the fly.
Yeah.
So talking about McLaren there, right? One of the questions I wanted to ask, given you're on, is obviously one thing we hear about all the time is the ceiling of these regulations, right? And as we've talked about earlier on, balance played a big part in the actual performance on track. But if, say, Red Bull and Ferrari with their new suspension and McLaren are on top of the balance, it seems like McLaren is kind of king at that at the moment. Do you think there's much more in terms of development ceiling here? Is there any kind of idea on that? Or I know it's mostly guesswork anyway, without all the tools and such, but what's your thoughts on that?
Let's see. So when I asked the question around this, the answer that I get is that there is still aero development. It's just a matter of unlocking it. And unlocking it means enabling it through your platform control and your dynamics. And so this is why, coming back to the original point around, if there's any place that I think you want to innovate, it's going to be on platform control, dynamic control side of things. Because I think a lot of teams have ideas on how they want to improve aerodynamically and what they can do. And this is gains that they've seen in the wind tunnel already.
Yeah.
But it's that they don't translate to all different kinds of tracks.
Yeah.
And so it can work very well in certain kinds of tracks where, I don't know, like maybe a Monza or something where you don't have a whole bunch of weird twisty turny things, but it's not going to work great, in Suzuka or China or wherever.
Yeah.
So for me, I think that's the key, right? It seems like McLaren has found that originally, and they've just been developing their aero now upwards, sort of along that trajectory path that's been supported by the dynamics. Red Bull, from what I heard, is taking a stab at, and Casual, you mentioned something around some of the changes and things that they implemented to try to recover performance, and then the gap in Abu Dhabi. And one of the comments that I got was, we can only do as much as we can do until we get a new chassis or a new suspension.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there's certain things that you just are strictly hindered by. Yeah. And their solutions that they could implement last year, because they had what they had, was limited by that. And that now this is kind of driving with some of the rumors that I've heard, and I've had anybody at Red Bull. I got yelled at once by Red Bull HR, which was terribly terrifying. But and I will never reveal my sources. Yeah, I'll never reveal my sources. But just to say that no one from Red Bull has told me that they're changing their suspension, but I'm hearing rumors from different places that this is going on, and that kind of jives with some of the things that I heard earlier about the limitations in their ability to be able to kind of get back on a corrected pathway because of what they had. Yeah. So I think that I've probably deviated from the original question there, Jason, but I think McLaren has done a fantastic job on the suspension front. I think, like you mentioned, Ferrari's doing this, Red Bull's trying to do this to get back. I think that's where we'll see a lot of teams taking chances now. And then if they're able to find some unique solutions there that help them to unlock aero performance, then that's how the teams are going to be able to separate themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. Yeah, I think then really we have to say, going into 2025, coming into the season, it probably is kind of Mercedes. What is happening with my English during this podcast?
Mercedes and McLaren. Mercedes.
Mercedes.
McLaren does run a Mercedes engine, so Mercedes, that works.
But yeah, it does seem like it's McLaren's kind of season to lose then, right? Because they obviously have it. They should be coming into the season with the same suspension platform and building the aero, whereas Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes are kind of jumping into probably change suspension and have to figure that out first and then pile the aero on over the start of the season. And we've lost Casual, who will be back in a minute. He got annoyed about my English, I think.
And Casual.
Yeah. But yeah, I'll just keep going. Would you agree that that would be the case then, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a learning curve. There's going to be inherent risk associated with innovation. There always is. And some teams will hit it. Some teams won't hit it. Will Red Bull get it right away? I would like to think so, because apparently I'm a biased Red Bull hack. But I would like to think they get it right. Will Mercedes get it right? Will Ferrari get it right? I mean, it's so hard to say all these things. And Casual's back.
My fucking dog. I mean, it's my niece's dog. He's here today.
Blame it on your niece. There you go.
Yeah.
You're not going to tell us that your dog unplugged the internet, are you? Because that's the oldest excuse.
Tripped over the router. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyways.
Yeah. Well, we were just talking about the aerodynamics of your niece's dog anyway, so perfect timing. No, we were talking about just the risk associated with making the suspension changes that Ferrari is reportedly making, Red Bull's reportedly making. Yeah, I mean, there's risk associated with all these things, but somebody will get it right and somebody won't get it right, and then they'll have to figure out why. I think that probably the complexity of the problem that is how you relate the aerodynamics to to the car dynamics and kind of that. I mean, if I had to write out an equation, like a model to model, car dynamic motion with then aerodynamic performance, like it would make my head explode. Like these two things are so incredibly complex, but they do this. This is how they create their simulators. This is how they create the things that they do. And if you've got a problem in one of those areas, anytime you're making a change, now you have to kind of relearn that part. Yeah. And not only just relearn that part, but relearn that relationship with that part to the other part. Mm-hmm. How does the relationship of the frequency response of the platform dynamics relate to the aerodynamic frequency response? Those two things could be out of phase, right? So this is all like introducing new variables that's potentially going to cause you problems, and there's always risk associated with that.
That's my concern for the other teams facing McLaren is that, Red Bull obviously have one of the best understandings of these regulations of anyone, probably more so now after having the issues, but that also means that, them having to change, it is still
they might also
50-50.
be chasing the clock, isn't it? Because it was only in Monza when, according to Max, where you said that they went through the data, and it was specifically in Monza where they compared what was going on in the previous season and this one. They found a specific area where it was a bit there was a bit of an anomaly, and that's where they found, okay, this is the area where things have been going wrong, and then they just went back. It went like months of development and just found out.
It was like Spain 2023, I think, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's just when it's that, it does mean that since Monza, they've been trying to work on this thing. And if you're working on the next year's car, it's usually by mid-season, you're on it. They have this another 1 month or so, another of lead time where they have to compensate for that as well. It's interesting, honestly, because what this does is, again, for me, the ideal scenario would be that all 4 teams are within a couple of tenths. So as a fan and as someone who's covering the sport, things are very unpredictable.
And because you want Max to win, because we know if all the cars are basically the same, Max is essentially going to win.
I was going to say, how unbiased of you, Casual, your comment there.
It's basically what should we say? I mean, the name Casual was also first. What should we call it? Yeah.
I love it. You literally, your job is to report on F1, and your name is the casual F1 fan. It's like, actually, what are you talking about?
Yeah, the story behind it was when the social accounts I started them, I didn't want to use my original name because I was working with a bank. So just moving on.
You said that so quietly, like with a bank.
No one's listening. It was a bank.
Yeah. So from there, transitioning to this thing, it was a bit like I wanted to keep it anonymous, and then a lot of people started calling me the casual. You're just a casual. You're just casual. So I said, cool, this works. Yeah. Let's go with that.
Drive to survive, casual fan. You.
So that's how the name, and again, the blatantly biased was also what Jason and I conceived, something on the same lines.
Just because we constantly get called biased from a variety of different fan bases.
They're biased against Max, Lando, Leclerc, Lewis. Probably not Lewis, because we are against Lewis most of the time.
My favorite was getting called a Norris fanboy on a podcast where I called out something that Max did, and then later in the podcast said he was the best driver since Schumacher. And they were like, "You just hate Max. You're a Norris fanboy." And it's like, oh, well, go away. But anyway. So what were we talking about before your tangent?
McLaren.
That's the one. Yes.
Yeah. By the way, losing someone like a Rob Marshall. I mean, a lot of people have said, okay, by the way, you had views about this. The DR,
Rob Marshall is the best.
partial DRS. The rear
Rob
wing
Marshall
partial.
is he is the new Adrian Newey, and no one's planning this out properly.
Yeah.
That's what's happened here.
Right. Rob Marshall, like from everything that I've heard, certainly had a lot of really good ideas when he was at Red Bull. And some of those ideas they didn't necessarily implement and found their way onto the McLaren.
Yeah.
So
some of which got outlawed.
The DRS. By the way, what's your view on that in terms of, I think, taking both the aspects into the equation, where we are talking about not only the sporting aspect but the kind of engineering involved in that. Is it specifically related to the material dynamics that they've been using? because the flexi wing was also, McLaren was a pioneer in that, and then the rear wing even. So
I love it. I mean, from an innovation standpoint, I thought it was fantastic. Like, I mean, I'm always a fan of these kinds of things. Now, when I went through and looked at the technical regs with my partner Molly on the show, we couldn't necessarily find a place in the regulation where it was just like blatantly cheating. And
yeah, it wasn't.
I wanted to. I really wanted to be able to find it, but it wasn't there. So then I thought, wow, it's just implementation of a gray area. From kind of an engineering design standpoint, yeah, brilliant to be able to get it to react the way that you want it to. I think flexibility of aero, elastic aero flexibility of aero surfaces is something that is in the industry, whether it's aeronautics or motorsports or whatever, that people have been doing for many, many years.
Yeah.
So if you control it with, say, carbon fiber layups, by having different layups with different directions that give you different strengths in different directions, you can do it that way. You can change thicknesses and areas. There's any number of ways that you can preferentially design something to move in a way that you want it to. Yeah. Now, the thing that is always risky with introducing a dynamic that can cause you to gain performance is that it can alternatively cause you to lose performance if now you can't control that dynamics like you want to. Having it open at certain speeds or close at certain speeds to be able to then recover the downforce that you wanted to recover before you go into corner entry, for instance. So yeah, I mean, all these things are incredibly challenging. The guys and gals and people at McLaren found a way to do it, and I applaud them for doing that, because I think that's no easy solution to get to. I think other teams have tried ways to do this as well. I mean, we see it happening. It's still happening on the front wings.
Yeah.
I personally...
They're allowed, right? The FIA said that they can just go nuts with the front wing now.
So far.
Yeah, well, they will be for 2025 anyway.
I mean, 2026 is active aero, so that's a completely different ball game.
Definitely. But Red Bull basically were waiting for that answer, and I imagine that's something that they'll focus on over the off season. And one thing the other team should be concerned about is that Red Bull, when it comes to flexi aero, are somewhat experts.
Kings.
So if I've heard a lot of people talking about the flexi aero in terms of that's what helped McLaren get that edge with a lot of their balance. I don't know how much of that is true or how big of a difference it'll make, but if it is a case that made a huge difference, then they should be concerned about Red Bull, as I said. So that will be interesting for 2025.
I heard some really spicy rumors about things that happened behind the scenes regarding the rear wing flexibility and the front wing flexibility, and interestingly, one being made illegal or very strongly kind of pushing teams away from that solution, versus another which was not made illegal, and why that was. But these are all just rumors, and you never know what's really true.
Spell it out.
but what I hear, I will tell you this. But what I hear is that the flexibility of the front wing has a much more of a performance advantage than the rear wing mini DRS.
Would make sense, right? Because that's where the start of all your aero to the rest of the car goes. Whereas the mini DRS would only give you some extra straight line performance more than anything.
Apparently,
it wouldn't help you in the corners.
Mini DRS, there was something in the regulations that they used to ultimately outlaw it. I'm not able to remember the exact
to be honest,
wording of that thing.
I genuinely, when I saw that at Baku,
I loved it.
I thought it was hilarious to watch everything unfold.
Yeah, right? that's also true.
It immediately gets called cheating. And I'm like, well, for me, cheating in F1 is if you've actually broken the rules. If you found a grey area, that's what F1's all about. So I'm fine with that. That's the whole beauty of the sport. It's an engineering series, and then we just put some meat in the front to turn the wheel. So it's beautiful in that way. But I thought the Baku
that
mini
sounded
DRS...
so wrong. Anyways.
Sorry. I thought the mini DRS from McLaren, that felt to me like a mistake or a problem in engineering because it was so obvious. Like it was so obvious what was happening. And I knew that within a race, they could just go and do what they did in 2021, which is we'll just put some dots and some cameras on there and we'll find this out in a second. And we'll just update with a technical directive, I think they're called, right? That felt like maybe they had done it somewhat, but someone had really fucked up with the carbon layering, where it's like, okay, we want a slight gap, which will give us a tiny advantage, but maybe let's not have the whole wing flex up where it's so obvious on camera. It felt like someone had made a mistake there more than that's what they were aiming for.
Did people say that it was there in Zandvoort? So and nobody picked up on it.
Would it have made sense to be in Zandvoort? Because that's a more high DF circuit, right? And this was a more of a low downforce track, if I'm not wrong.
Depends how controlled you can get
Baku
it, right?
and Monza.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
was there in Monza, by the way.
The difference in Baku is that the top speed on that long straight is much higher.
You won the race because of it, honestly. To be very honest. Otherwise,
I mean, but when you run the higher loaded wings, versus like the low downforce wings, then your load distribution across that rear wing is going to be totally different.
Massive.
And so in that way, then, if you've designed in the aeroelasticity, you're going to get much more. It's like Jason said, it's like, if there's any place where this problem it's really going to open, it's going to be Baku.
Yeah.
But then when other people were telling me it was there in Zandvoort as well, and nobody picked up on it. By the way, I heard that teams picked up on this before it ever was called out on X.
Yeah.
Then why did they not? Yeah. It was by brake boosted, right?
They probably were behind the scenes, right? Talking about
this. It was by Brandon is the one that posted it first.
Yeah, Brandon. Yeah.
But I heard that the FIA had already received some complaints from some teams that had noticed this before, and it wasn't until the social media caught it, and then now all of a sudden it blew up, and then it was sort of like now something had to happen.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, because I think the FIA, until that pressure, were probably going to do what they did with the front wings, which were like, look, if it's not absolutely obvious and people aren't going to go insane, we're not going to change the regs coming into a last season of a regulation.
I do think that was a bit interesting because flexi wings is something that ideally FIA has come down hard, but maybe because it was some team other than Red Bull that was doing it and they just let it be because... I mean, it's been enough of a Red Bull dominance. Maybe that played a role.
You're not saying the FIA would change regulations to mix up the competitive order, are you? Surely not. Tell me it's
I mean, yeah. They do a lot of things, don't you?
The FIA making incompetent and... I don't know. The FIA, I don't think is competent enough to be biased. That's my only thing. I think they just get pressured by teams.
It was a good season in all sense, right, of things.
Yeah.
And there were some decisions made. I think you can point to some decisions made to say that, like, okay, this probably helped it to be a good season. Mm-hmm. And what's in the FIA's interest? They want competitive racing. Nobody wanted 2023 again.
I still, when it comes to the FIA thing, I always put it that it's more on FOM than the FIA, right? Because you've got the teams and stuff, and obviously Stefano and his team, who want a more competitive order because that gives you, greater views and they make more money and so on. The FIA get for their money ups every few years, I think, in the Concord Agreement.
I think we discussed it earlier as well. They get a share of the revenues.
Sure,
FIA
but
it's a share of a good share of a revenue.
I think it's a fixed fee though, right? It's not.
That's a license fee. That's the license fee for the F1 trademark and the other thing. That's why when they talk about FOM and FIA separating, the problem is the Formula One name goes. So they don't want to do that.
I don't like defending the FIA, but I've had to do it a lot this season. I think they're incompetent is my problem. And I'm constantly like, I don't think they're biased.
If you're defending FIA this much.
I know. I'm sorry. I have done it a lot this year.
We'll buy you an FIA polo shirt. You can wear it on podcast.
It was between Mexico. Was it Austin, Mexico, and Brazil?
That time.
That was I was getting so annoyed.
That was a bad run.
Yeah, and honestly, that was them being incompetent. And honestly, that was not even them being incompetent, but being consistent. The timings of the safety cars and stuff like that. I had to literally write entire posts where I mentioned that This is the same reaction time that has been there in the earlier races, and it is still there now. So it's probably them being incompetent always, or them just being this is their you can say permissible reaction time.
They're just constantly reactive instead of proactive all the time. They just wait until things go wrong and then they change things. I think the biggest thing of the FIA incompetence is the fact that Article 15.3 still has that the racing director has complete overriding authority of the safety car. Yeah. So what we've learned is Michael Massey is gone, but nothing else has changed. So if 2021 was to happen again, that could legally go exactly the same way, and no one could do anything.
Someone needed somebody to literally scapegoat and get angry.
But you'd think the simple thing would be like, we should probably change that regulation. Here we are, like 3 seasons later, regulation's still the same.
And that's why I don't get Toto Wolff, because whenever Michael Massey's name is mentioned, he just goes on a hissy fit. But just look at the basic issue that is there, and you've not done anything to address that. What's the point?
Well, speaking of Mercedes not being consistent on issues, how do we think Mercedes' performance is going to be in 2025?
Nice segue.
Thank you.
I don't understand Mercedes.
I don't think Mercedes do either.
That triggered a cough.
Sorry.
No, that was a good one. I don't understand Mercedes, just because, like, when I think that they're back, then it's like now, like you were saying, cold weather performance versus hot weather performance. I think their biggest issue is how they're managing the tires. That's no massive hot take. I think that was a big question last year. So if they can get their heads around it, when the tires were in the window, the car was fast. Right. I mean, it was fast. And George has proven himself to be, a very competent, good driver. And I think Kimi is going to be obviously going to take his lumps. He's going to go through kind of his transition. I almost could see him sort of going through a first year Max Verstappen type-esque experience where he's just like
winning,
honestly, the people that don't know it, just watch Max's 2015 season, cause that was brilliant. Some of the races that he executed, it was just a breath of fresh air, and I hope Kimi has that. So go ahead.
It seems like he has that on the limit, right? Where it's either crash or win. Like it's one or the other. It's great. It's brilliant. Yeah.
It's just being a teenager, honestly.
But that's going to be a really cool dynamic to watch. From a car development standpoint, I still think that they're kind of finding their way a little bit. Do they know enough to be able to design out the issues that they had in kind of how they manage the tires? I don't know. I think that's why I don't know what to say about Mercedes for next year, is because I think it's all very much contingent on that. Like, are they going to be able to wrap their heads around why they couldn't get the tires to perform consistently? And that's not easy. Like, tire science is like black magic. There's no, there's people that get their PhDs in it, but they're sick, twisted individuals. And, and it's just a bunch of voodoo magic. So it's like, whatever, but maybe they'll find their way.
Yeah, I think one of the optimistic outlooks you could have for Mercedes coming into the season is that if we look at how McLaren got to where they are, it's basically a lot of errors and mistakes that have caused them to be here. Like, 2021 to 2022, one of their key issues was basically the McLaren before them was always on a knife edge, and every driver said, even Carlos Sainz said to Ricciardo, like, it's difficult to drive, right? Because it's constantly on a knife edge. Ferrari had this issue as well for a while, and they kind of worked on fixing that balance out. And then there was the technical directive in 2022 where they lowered, was it 15 millimeters or raised 15 millimeters?
Raised 15 millimeters, and the floor. It was first a 2-tier floor and then turned into a single tier, something like that.
Yeah, and everything we heard about that was that McLaren basically, because of that change, had to essentially throw a load of stuff out and start again. So it seems like McLaren going through those issues and particularly focusing on the floor and balance has got them to where they are. So my point on all this is maybe by fucking up so much for 3 seasons, Mercedes will know what not to do at the very least and show up with a decent car. So
I've said this before that like what they went through when they had to sort out the issues with the bouncing and the porpoising should seriously have put them in a position where they could be, extremely knowledgeable on this subject and could implement like solutions that nobody else can implement because they've just been through the fire.
Yeah.
But and now it's a tire temperature management issue. So again, I don't know. They're like an enigma to me. I do know people on their team. And I think at one point in time when it came to development and stuff like that, I think there was a little bit of a different kind of a culture and dynamic than there is now with James Allison. And I think that's positive. So I think the team from that standpoint stands to gain in the long term.
Yeah.
But can they put it all together in one season for next year? Do they want to dedicate that much time to try to put it all together for one season, or do they want to try to focus on 2026?
All depends on where they start, right? If they're close enough, then they'll probably stick it out. If it isn't the case, then they'll just call time on it. This is the first car that would be... just go ahead.
No, it's just really quickly, I was just going to say I think what you touched on earlier with the understanding of the suspension, and we talked about 2026, I think part of it will be that they will have to, at the very least, try and figure that out for 2025, because if they go into 2026 still not understanding how to kind of work with ground effect and suspension, it's going to be a huge issue no matter how good their engine is. So perhaps they will put a little bit more into 2025, like Sauber is going to apparently, but we'll see.
Audi, don't call it Sauber now.
No, Sauber for 2025.
Oh yeah, no, it's
they're gonna
kick, stake, or whatever. Whatever gambling.
Kick, stake, only fans F1 team.
Yeah.
Well done, stake. Yeah.
Oh God.
At least we're not are we still calling them Racing Bulls? Which
one is Racing Bulls?
They're
not Visa Cash App Racing Bulls anymore. They're just Racing Bulls now.
Yeah, I believe on the actual list now they are just down because the website updated. I believe
it's Racing Bulls.
Yeah.
So there's no more Visa Cash App.
I mean, Visa and Cash App came because of Daniel, so that also plays a role.
It's still Visa RB Cash App on the website.
It is.
Yeah, it's the convention is written that way because the contract, the way it was signed, it was supposed to be that, but the money's gone now. So
it'll be Racing Bulls
with the Aussie.
Year,
I just had one question with Mercedes. This will be the first car that James Allison is making from the beginning to the end, right? Because the previous, I think he came back mid-2023, if I'm not wrong. So that wasn't the car that was entirely built by him, but this one will have his entire supervision from the beginning to the end. Even though, we are not in a generation where you can basically pinpoint a single person who is building the car, but the fact that he's back, I think it's a big...
They set the direction, right?
Yeah. Because again,
that makes sense.
Yeah, because James ideally does not get the kind of credit that maybe an Adrian Newey does, but he's built some brilliant cars over the years. The Renaults of 2005, 2006, the beautiful Lotus 12 and 13. Talk about cars that actually hold on to their tires. Those were the ones, honestly. And now we are back. I don't know. Again, this is where it gets very interesting because Mercedes was one of the teams that was able to bring in those flexible front wings. Again, Mercedes and McLaren were the two teams that could do that. Where are they going to find performance and keep the tires as well in the window? So maybe, I don't know, the kind of, what should we call it? The scope of improvement that Mercedes would have. Would it be big enough? A lot of questions around them, honestly.
Yeah.
But at least when it snows, they'll actually do well. So there's some positives.
If we have a snowy race.
I don't know. I'm optimistic because Lewis is gone now, and he was the problem baby. He was like the Sergio Perez of Mercedes. Oh
God!
Sorry, I had to get my weekly bash in that upsets the comments.
Nice just get everybody pissed off.
Oh boy!
even Max Verstappen fans will be annoyed about that. I don't know how, but they will.
Yeah, they'll find out. It's by the way, just moving on from the top 4 teams. What the fuck is going on with Aston Martin? I don't know what other way I can frame this thing, but what's going on? how can a team that could build a car that was still, I think it started the season as the fifth fastest car, and still anything that they put on that car, I think even if they try a new paint job, that's going to make the car slower. That's how pathetic the upgrade package were. What's going on?
I don't know. Honestly, I think. I mean, they're not using their new wind tunnel yet, so there could be some issues related to kind of the tools that they have at their disposal to design and develop upgrades and things like that. Certainly, the team is not incompetent. I mean, Dan Fallows is honestly a very competent engineer.
London.
I think there's. Yeah, I think there's some issues that they have fundamentally inside the team, I'm sure, with just... I've heard some things around the culture. Yeah, I've heard some things around the culture of the team. And maybe some of those things around that culture side of things could be playing off into the design direction and development. How much of a desire do you have as an engineer or an individual to innovate and take chances if you know that you taking chances and taking risks could potentially lead to your
job
release?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I have a different view on Aston here, which is I think that like they only moved into their factory, or was that earlier this year or 2023? I'm getting
moved to the factory the previous
May,
season,
wasn't it?
They moved in 2024. The wind tunnel will be, I think it was March 2025.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Like the thing is, there's a lot of parts here that are still kind of moving together. A lot of people that are moving around. Like, I think the problem is people kind of constantly go back to look how good it did with Force India. But I think there's a very different culture and vibe that you're trying to build when you're putting together a team that's going for a title.
I mean, remember how cool Vijay Mallya was and how
look, if you want something done cheaply, you go to the Indians. But yeah, so the
anyway, still the same number of podiums, still the same, and apparently this was pointed out by Vijay Mallya himself. I mean, who's still in hiding in England, by the way.
And we're still looking for a new co-host, preferably one who's perhaps Chinese and get things done better on this podcast instead of the Indians. Anyway, I told you racism would come in somehow, but I'm Irish. It's fine. But yeah, anyway, I'm joking. What was I going to say? Where was I? Oh yeah. So look, they're trying to bring all these things together. No offense, Casual. You know I love you really. But yeah, they're trying to bring all these things together, and the wind tunnel's online. McLaren, for example, did talk about this for years. Remember, they were constantly bashing, when the wind tunnel comes online, we'll win. And everyone's like, stop making excuses. Wind tunnel comes online, they win the next season's constructors. So there is something to kind of putting this together and going from being a midfield team to a title winning team. Like, there's a huge difference there. And I think the other thing that we kind of forget about with Aston is I think a lot of the hype and expectations just come from where they were at the start of 2023. But in reality, that was down to the fact that the other teams just did such a shit job around them, more than Aston actually doing they did a good job, don't get me wrong, but it was more that Mercedes, Ferrari and McLaren were all just terrible at the start of the season.
Yeah.
I think so I think our expectations are off, and 2025 I think is going to be the same. Even Alonso, in an interview, they were like, where do you think you'll be in 2025? And he was like, nowhere, we're not even thinking about it. Like, he was like, yeah, he basically not Tom Holland, that's the actor.
Tom McCullough.
The interviewer.
Tom Clarkson.
That's the one. He asked him, he's like, so you just don't think you'll be anywhere? And he's like, no, the wind tunnel won't be online. Adrian Newey isn't going to be there till March. Cadillac is only kind of settling in. He's like, our focus is going to be completely on 2026. So I think 2025 is going to be, they're going to be told to try and build the best platform you can in the winter and then switch off, purely so when Adrian and co come in, they can assess what's going on. Sorry, my daughter's shouting through the door there. But yeah. I think that's all they're going to be doing. I don't think we're going to see them anywhere in 2025.
I'm slightly worried if that's the right approach, because I don't think the entire design team has any confidence that they can actually develop a car through the season.
But that's my point, though, right? You tell them, when Adrian signed those papers, he probably, if he's smart, which we all assume he is, probably said the thing that I would think, because I'm smarter than Adrian, we all know this. But to stress test the team over the winter. So that you can come in and find those issues straight away.
Yeah.
That would be the smart thing to do.
The
I
proof
would
is in the
assume.
pudding, right? That for me, again, Aston Martin.
I've never once found proof in pudding, by the way. I'd just like to point that out.
Yeah, I mean,
you have to put
Floyd Mayweather
alcohol
used
in
to say
pudding
that.
for there to be proof in pudding.
There you go.
Yeah.
Engineers.
Don't they
approach.
put rum in certain kinds of pudding?
Yeah, I think that's
They
where
put a lot of
I'm
things
guessing
in
that's
this
where
it
the saying comes from.
Yeah. It's probably some British alcoholic or something.
I wouldn't know. Us Irish don't drink much.
Yeah,
Not at all.
I'm not even going there. So. The thing is, where Aston Martin and to an extent Sauber find themselves is the car development and maybe just progressing through the grid. They've not really shown that for at least the team to have any kind of confidence right now, and just expecting or just believing that out of the blue they'll develop a grid beater. There's no, first of all, there's no precedence to that. When we talk about Mercedes, I mean, for me the biggest example is Mercedes, because it does appear that Aston is following that particular model. They've brought in, I mean, people forget the Mercedes technical team in 2014 had Bob Bell, Jeff Willis, I'm forgetting the name,
Andy Cowell.
Andy Cowell, Mike Elliott, all these guys in the same team, and they built that car. But in 2013, Mercedes was second in the championship. It's not that out of the blue they just built the best car and everything was perfect. They grew and developed and they reached that particular point. Right now, they don't really seem to have that kind. First of all, the squad does not have that confidence that they can do that. And I think it might be a bit of a, again, they know best, but it might be a bit of a misstep if they just write this year off and just assume that everything's going to be perfect next season. You need to bring stuff on the car and at least see that for a change they work. They don't have
I guess
that yet.
if anyone knows how to do that, though, it's Newey, right? Because when he came into Red Bull, that was
It was a mess.
Yeah, he talked about that in the podcast. There was a lot of like leftovers from Jaguar who just, these were great engineers, but just had the wrong mindset for building an F1 team.
Gunther
And I
was there,
think-
the technical. So
Yeah,
then, that can never be good.
No, like he said, when he came in, one of the engineers who, basically turned to him and said, look, I know you're coming in, you want to shake things up, but we do things a certain way around here.
Yeah.
And he said, like, that was one of the first people he fired. He's like, just gone. He didn't say it as blatantly as that because Newey's not like that, it seems, in interviews. But yeah, I think, look, if anyone can go in and figure out what's wrong and what's right, it'll be Newey. And they seem to have all the right ingredients, right? And the factory is built specifically for cost cap F1, and I think that could give them a huge advantage. But
It's a
you're
beautiful
right, like,
facility, by the way. The
I think
best in Formula One right now.
yeah,
Just
and I
by
know the
far.
two of us are massive Alonso fanboys at times, as well as Vettel fanboys.
I mean, I lived in my entire F1 life hating Alonso, but he's 40 plus now. So at some point, you have to give up.
I love that he stirred the pot all the time. So I would love to see them have it in 2026, but I don't think that's the case. I think it'll be 27, 28 before they get there. There's too much to...
It makes me sad.
It's going to take time. It's going to take time to, get the team shaped to how Adrian, likes it, or to a high-performing team. I'm interested to see how much Lawrence Stroll allows, how much control he allows Adrian to really have.
Yeah.
That was kind of the first thing that I asked myself when it was announced was, and one of the reasons why when we were all considering where's Adrian going to go. I mean, I certainly thought it was going to be Ferrari. I think he got close to Ferrari at one point, but my questions about the whole rumors around Aston Martin was like, is he going to get along at all with like Lawrence Stroll, and because of some of the things I've heard around kind of the tight control that Stroll has on the
Organizational
ship.
structure as well, the way they kind of
exactly.
operate things.
Yeah.
But he must. I mean, surely Stroll is smart enough to know that you give Newey a structure around him that he wants, and then you let him just kind of create what he wants to create out of that, and you kind of keep your hands off.
I think the good news for that situation will be that I'm sure that Newey, when he came in, had a look around, probably would have been quite blunt about, like, this is going to take X amount of time to get somewhere. Yeah. And he's such an engineer, I'm sure he probably would have given a worst case as well. So I'm sure Stroll probably knows that going in. But yeah, you're right. We'll see. The only problem with Stroll is he's a business guy, so he's going to be impatient, right? So you're right. Like how long
you can see that already. Just, I mean, Dan Fallows has a proven track record, and he's done. He's done with Aston Martin. To be honest, you can call it whatever you want. That's it. Yeah.
I think Andy Kell coming in as well is a good idea too, because I mean he's been there
that's the move, honestly.
His move into position, especially straight after 100 days, that was clearly planned. It was at day 101. Like, it was such a business playbook thing. Look, I think they have all the right ingredients. It's just going to be interesting to see what happens. But I don't know. I had a point to make and I've forgotten it. That's what aging does. Anyway.
Yeah. Seems to be the case, isn't it? Anyways, just moving down the grid, just to just wrap things up. Sauber is not even a team I really want to talk about, because even they don't know what they've brought for a while now. It's a team in complete tatters. Yeah.
I just remembered what I was going to say. Just
Go for it.
Yeah, because you brought Mattia Binotto. My mind went through the loops. I think the reason Newey never went to Ferrari, and I said this a while back, I think that probably all started the moment Lewis got hired, just because of how that happened behind the scenes. Because from everything I've heard, it basically went over Fred's head, and Fred was brought in and basically told... We know that kind of when Fred got the job, he was like, I want complete control. I don't want board interference all the time if I'm going to do this. And I think Lewis just being brought in, even though I know Fred is happy with Lewis being there, I'm not saying he's not, but he wasn't given point on that. It was very much board decisions. And I wonder if Newey saw that and thought, well, even if they tell me I'll have complete control, I've had problems with driver decisions in the past. Frank Williams, thank you very much.
Twice, by the way.
Twice, yeah. Damon Hill and Mansell, right?
Oh, yeah. Mansell as well.
Yeah. And the other bit around, like, the Ferrari way and things being done, in Maranello, and what was Newey's presence going to be in Maranello.
Yeah.
At one point in time, they were talking about basically like a hybrid type structure where he would go in for a few weeks at a time or whatever out of each couple of months and spend time directly with the team, otherwise working remotely. I don't think that really sat well with Adrian either. I think he is very much wants to be there on location, working on his whiteboard and doing that stuff. So that was always going to be a tough one to get across the line, I think.
Whereas Aston gave him kind of that freedom to do whichever way he wanted, plus
not have to move.
Plus the shit ton of money, honestly.
The shit ton of money probably helps. Yeah, but I think the biggest thing was with Ferrari, and the reason I thought if it wasn't Ferrari, it was going to be Aston, was the not only that looseness, but also the fact that there's a production line of cars there. So if he ever wants to go and actually build a road car, he can do that. And I'm sure Ferrari said to him, "You can build the Ferrari Newey or whatever it will be called."
He definitely enjoyed his time on the Valkyrie project. I had heard that.
Yeah.
So I think that helped him not having to relocate or do anything and be able to, get the money that he would get. This is also one of the reasons why I thought at one point the Mercedes move might potentially be on. But I knew there was a lot of kind of skeletons in the closet in kind of that relationship there.
With Mercedes?
Yeah.
How so?
People on the team in Mercedes after AD21.
Oh.
He also knew he spoke about that on the podcast he did, High Performance Podcast as well. He was a bit surprised how long they continue to talk about Abu Dhabi 21.
He still does. Yeah. He is comparing him to a Donald Trump or something. Toto has completely, gone.
He did say on that podcast as well, which I found interesting, was that basically Mercedes had just come off one of the most successful runs in history. And he's like, if I'm going somewhere, I want a proper challenge. I don't want to just go somewhere where we're close to winning and it's just like, just change some stuff around and we've got a title now. So.
By the way, it does appear whenever James Allison is involved, Newey doesn't go. Because in 2014 Ferrari, Allison was already there. So interesting. I hope.
So anyway, sorry, you wanted to go down the grid.
Sorry.
Sorry.
That's right.
I've ruined this podcast. I'm sorry. How about it?
Not the first time.
Won't be the last.
Yeah. It's just talking about Alpine, by the way, just to wrap things up. Other than that, we have basically the B teams. Okay, it's your favorite team, Jason. Pucker up.
I love Flavio, but I'm pissed off right now.
Yeah. By the way, it's a 5-year contract with Franco Colapinto.
That's why I'm pissed off. They're going to ruin that young man's career.
And it's just as like a reserve driver.
Yeah, he's driving. He's driving within, I think, after Australia,
Eventually.
just one race for the Aussie, and then boom, change. We'll have the South American in. He is South American, right?
Yes. Thank you, Helmut Marko, for confirming that. Yes.
Yeah. The way Alpine has actually developed throughout that season, was it a case of them not understanding the car and just learning and just getting to that, or were they able to ultimately get the concept right? Because the new car that they had in 2024, you look at it, it's a complete departure from what they had previously, right? What do you make of it? Because by the end of the season, they were right. I think they were kind of leading the midfield as well in Abu Dhabi.
Alpine has been a mess for a time because of some of their internal dramas.
Yeah,
honestly. I knew of a couple of people that were arrows on that side, and the stories were not good. That people leaving in droves. I mean, not wanting to be there anymore. I think it all began with that. I think ultimately they were able to field a competent team that could put some performance on the car, put some gains on the car. Depending on what you choose to believe or not, there was some issues with the power unit itself that are still issues with the power unit in terms of its sealing performance. There's a very interesting, though, stay tuned to listen to maybe more news that might be coming out around Cadillac and the future of their entry and their relationship with Alpine.
God, no.
But they're not it's not to do with the engine, obviously.
Okay, so what you're hinting at is this team becomes high-tech and Alpine buys a stake with Cadillac. Or what? Because the power unit is gone, right?
Unless
you have to look
they
at
buy Vieri.
Ollie Oaks and what he's doing and who he used to be with. I mean, the writing on the wall, honestly, for high tech is there, I think. Yeah. But I think the relationship of who will now be a power unit supplier in the future is probably
I get what you mean. Developed. So Cadillac would eventually. Yeah, I get you. Okay.
But Cadillac makes sense. Yeah, we'll probably talk about it a bit. But Cadillac, you think they're going to build a power unit for 2028? Because I think that does not make any business sense. If I'm being honest. Rather,
Cadillac is making moves behind the scenes to absolutely do that. Yeah,
I think they had to.
No.
I think FIA and FOM weren't going to let them on the grid without at least committing to it. So I think they had to.
The power unit in 28. Go for 2030. Build a completely new one.
Yeah, they can delay it down the road, but I think they have to commit to that. Yeah.
The facility is online, right? It's already online. I read a report just recently that they bought a new place for specifically the Cadillac powertrain just recently. If I'm not wrong. Yeah. Anyways.
I think recently was announced around in North Carolina, someplace in North Carolina.
Yeah.
That they would be doing the power units, I think.
Interesting.
I don't know if it was an existing place that they purchased or not. I'm not sure. I do know people who would know, though. So I will ask. Just because now I'm curious.
I think, look, the obvious reason why Alpine jumped up is just because Flavio joined, and Flavio fixes everything. So that's it, really. There's no magic.
What's going to happen in 26 when I know we're talking about Cadillac now? What's going to happen in 26 when Cadillac is getting Ferrari engines for a couple of years before they get their power unit online? That to me is going to be really interesting to follow. How that works.
You'd have to imagine they'll do the Haas thing in 2026 as well, of taking as many parts as possible, right?
Because
I don't think you can. The model is changed.
Well, the mechanical,
right? Isn't it?
Well, no, the mechanical platform area kind of still.
Yeah, the mechanical would be there, but Haas when Haas joined the sport, the kind of shit they took was way too much.
right now, all aerodynamic surfaces have to be designed in-house, in-house or by your third party at the team exclusively to that team.
Yeah, but you can get all the mechanical bits and then put aero shrouds over it for suspension, and now you've satisfied the regulation.
You can get the mechanical platform, wait 3 races, and then just copy whatever you see Ferrari have on track. Hope it works. See what happens.
I mean, they got their work cut out for them. I mean, I do know some people that work for Andretti, or what was formerly Andretti. And
it's still the Andretti Global Group, right?
I'm so confused. They're completely rebranded though, because I know that there's people that they've got all new branding material and new polos and all kinds of stuff.
I think TWG stands for Trojan Work Group, right? Which is where they built a Trojan horse to bring the Andretti in. And then, hey, Michael Andretti.
But before January 1st, the team was working with pretty much unrestricted CFD runtime, aero runtime. Now, it's a massive mountain they have to climb. No doubt about that. But they were doing a lot of stuff. Or they could do a lot of development. I think this has been reported on as well many times. And then now in Jan 1, now they're restricted to the ATR, the aerodynamic testing regulations and everything. So they're going to be subjected to that. But they were able to do a lot on the front end. Yeah. So I'm sure they gained a lot of understanding towards the 2026 car. As long as they've got a competent PU, they've got competent mechanical platform.
The PU should be fine, right? The PU should be
fine. From Ferrari, they'll be fine for 2026. But I'm really excited to see what Cadillac can do, honestly, with their own power
28.
In 28, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's certain things that you need to be able to do that. And I think from what I hear, they're making the right moves in the background to set themselves up for that. So, 2028, I think, is a real possibility.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just... when it comes to Cadillac and Andretti, honestly, it just seems that, if I'm not wrong, they're probably more or better placed than Sauber at this stage. Because Audi is a complete shit show. So, what Binotto told...
I think Binotto said 2030, right? He said 2030 before they're fighting for a title, he said.
That's fine, even being a midfield front runner, as something as big a brand as as Audi, I'd expected them to at least start at a P6 or P5 level, and from there they build themselves up. I don't think it's going to be P9, P10. That's it.
25 is going to tell us a lot, I think, because I think that the key thing that they've done, and to give Mattia Binotto some much needed credit, because he is good at technical side of things, and Mattia and Fred could have been destroying the world with Ferrari at the moment, I think, as a group. But anyway, I think the one thing he's done, which has been quite good, is that I think he's made Audi see that he needs to have kind of a team of control, and it can't be board control. Because if there's one thing we've learned about Formula One from history, it doesn't matter how much money, who you have, if the board controls the team, it will never work. It just doesn't work in Formula One.
Yeah.
And I think him wrestling that and bringing in Jonathan Wheatley and kind of the setup changes he's made, I think we could see things change pretty quickly. And the one thing I do think will help, and we've seen this with McLaren,
Qatar investors, the Middle East investors.
I wasn't going to say that, but anyway, what I was going to say is,
but I'm right.
Under this new cost cap, ATR restrictions, these kind of things, it does mean that kind of lower teams can make bigger jumps a lot quicker than they were in the past.
Yeah.
So I think there is some hope there. It's a sliver of hope, but it's hope.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Let's see. Okay. Just to wrap it up, Dr. Obbs, in your view, how would you arrange the top 5 teams in your view as we head
next year
for 2025?
As the year finishes?
No, for 2025, at the start of 2025, what do you predict the pecking order is going to be?
I think McLaren's going to be fastest out of the box. I think Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari are all going to kind of be alternating behind that. I think Ferrari's probably in the best position to be P2, just based off of how they kind of ended the season, and then maybe maybe Mercedes and Red Bull might be kind of battling each other. Now, the biggest variable to that is that over the winter, somebody finds some sort of innovation that is in the gray space that allows them to take a bigger jump. And if that happens, then obviously you could see somebody jump ahead. But I think what we've been talking about during this podcast around, the McLaren's growth, McLaren's platform, the stability, all the things that they have working for themselves that allows them to start the season ahead will be why they start the season ahead. I think as the year goes on, I think it will happen that one of those teams behind McLaren will overtake McLaren. I do think so, because I think at some point the other teams will be able to kind of find some of the solutions that McLaren has found around the dynamic control of their mechanical platform, and they'll be able to then start to optimize some of the aero differences that they were not able to unlock before. So I think it'll be another exciting season. I think it's going to be the best season we're going to have. I think if anything, the season probably ends with, fingers crossed. I think Mercedes probably ends up P4. I think Red Bull and Ferrari will probably be fighting for P2. And I think McLaren will ultimately end up P1 because I think they'll have a strong start to the season, which will give them they've got two solid drivers, which are going to give themselves from a constructor standpoint a lot of points right away. Whereas you look at Mercedes breaking in a brand new driver, you look at Red Bull breaking in a brand new driver, Ferrari, although it is Lewis Hamilton, still breaking in a new driver and a new car. So I think
a driver who tends to warm up as well at the start of the season as it is. So
I think that will
he's going
play
to get
itself
cooked so bad, right? So
that will play itself into McLaren's hands and the constructors, and I think they'll give themselves a nice advantage.
Who do you think? Who do you think is going to win the drivers? If you had to bet.
Oh man. Gosh, next year is so up for grabs.
It's because it's so close. This is what makes it so difficult.
I mean, it's obvious. It's Fernando Alonso. So.
Yes, everybody knows. Why are we even talking about it? No, I want to believe. Okay, the bias side of me wants to believe that Max is going to get an amazing tool at his hands and is going to win another one. I think it's going to be incredibly challenging. I think by the sheer fact that Lando and Piastri will have competent machines at the beginning of the season, I think that ultimately gives probably the highest probability to Lando potentially to winning the Drivers' Championship. But I also think that Charles Leclerc, but it's still Charles Leclerc. Like he always shows those flashes, and you're just kind of like, man, this guy could be like incredible. But something happens along the way, some lack of consistency somewhere. Ferrari does Ferrari things, and then all of a sudden it's like now he's out of it. So I think the highest probability is Lando.
Okay.
Yeah, so we basically converted you into a Lando Norris fan. I mean,
I'm a Lando Norris stan. Yeah, please pass that along to the McLaren fans in my mentions.
The Blatantly Lando podcast.
Yeah. Cool.
What do you guys think?
I think
you're on the spot now. Jason first. I'm the show host.
I think it's going to be McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes. I do think Mercedes will be a bit distant. I kind of have this weird feeling, and sometimes my predictions, as Casual will tell you, sometimes I just get stuff blatantly out of intuition on the spot. I have this weird feeling that Mercedes is going to be the one kind of Uno card that's going to turn things around somehow. I just have this weird kind of, they've had so many fucking mistakes that I think something's going to go right, and they might be the ones who find that like kind of golden nugget in there somewhere.
They have a history of finding golden nuggets.
Yeah. So for the moment, I'm going to put them P4, but I think they could be the one that's wrong there. The problem for Ferrari I have is that if 2 or 3 teams are changing suspension, I have more confidence in Red Bull to get that right than I do Ferrari to get that right. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be another title fight. Well, I say title fight, another is the wrong word there, but it's going to be a title fight between Max and Lando for most of the season, I think, because of that reason. I think Piastri he's a brilliant racing driver. I just don't think he has quite the raw pace. And Norris just consistently has been getting better. He's been doing a really good job. The problem for Norris is going to be that McLaren, whether or not McLaren have learned from last season is going to be the big question, because most of his points loss was due to McLaren. He did lose a good few himself, but most of it was down to McLaren. So, if I had to put money on it, I think Max still wins the title, because I think that Max has proven one thing, which is every single opportunity he will maximize. The only thing, and I'll leave it at this, the only thing I could go against Max is I think that Max's kind of all or nothing worked really well last season when he had a points lead. He's going to have to be a bit more careful about that if he doesn't, because if he decides to kind of push Lando off track and Lando has a points lead and says, right then, we'll crash. If Lando does go that way, maybe he won't, then it negatively affects Max as opposed to positively affecting him this time. So that'll be an interesting dynamic. But he took on Lewis and won in 2021. So, I mean, if anyone can do it, it's Max. Yeah. Let's be honest here. So,
what about you, Casual? Where are you at?
So, yeah, again, I think something similar in terms of the proximity of the cars. I think it's going to be very close between all of them. When coming to drive, I think Mercedes will be the fourth. They might be the third. They might finish third in the championship, because I think Lawson is going to be a bit of a liability, just like every second Red Bull driver is to. And honestly, it's a bit to the detriment of Red Bull as well. They need to change their approach in terms of the kind of drivability of a car that only Max can drive. That limits the kind of, you can say, the possibilities that a team can have. So probably I think Red Bull will be fourth in the overall scheme of things. I think Mercedes will be third, because I think Kimi Antonelli beats Liam Lawson in the championship at the very least. I think maybe he'll pick up a win, and that is going to annoy a lot of people. If he wins one of the first 3 races, he beats Max's record of being the youngest race winner. So that's So that's still on the table. Whether that happens or not, it's a different thing. That's my fourth team, Red Bull. Third will be Mercedes. I'm slightly worried about how Lewis is going to pan out, because the adaptability. The 2024
You're such a
Mercedes,
Lewis fanboy.
Yeah, the 2024 Mercedes was basically Lewis's input, entirely Lewis's input, as was repetitively told to us, and he was not comfortable with the car.
What I heard.
Yeah, and he was not comfortable with that car. He's moving to Ferrari, a car that is probably it's going to be built entirely on Leclerc's input. How he adapts to that, it's a big question. I'm slightly worried that, honestly, my prediction was earlier that Lewis just sticks with Ferrari for 2025 and then retires, because the situation is going to be a bit too dire. I think Ferrari will be second. Again, I'm hoping Lewis is still decent enough. I think McLaren wins the Constructors' Championship. One of the biggest reasons is, I think the gap between Lando and Oscar is still going to be, it's going to be manageable, in the sense that there will be races where Oscar beats Lando, but he won't do it as regularly.
Yeah, just to point something out on that, Lando was, what was it? Was like 16-7 or something in
16-8
qualifying.
and 20-4.
But the actual difference was like a tenth or 0.12 or something. So they were really, really close over the course of the season.
So it could change. But again, I expected Oscar to beat Lando last season, so I've been wrong on that front. Maybe this season I'm again wrong. So it's going to be close, but I think it will still lean towards Lando, because I think the raw pace is still there. That's the edge that he has. Plus, the biggest problem was what cost him the championship was his poor starts. But since Las Vegas, he did not lose a single place at the start of the race ever. Once the whole thing, the whole mess happened in Brazil and it ended, since then, every race start, he nailed it, and he won a couple of races after that. Who wins the championship? Yeah, I'll probably go with Max. I think he's the best driver since Michael Schumacher, and I don't say that often. But
the two of us have just said this so much.
The difference is going to be, there are two things that are going to be the key differences. It's not going to be entirely the car. It's going to be how brilliant Red Bull is in terms of its strategies, where they are going to help Max in places where it's a bit. When it's a 50-50 situation, it's the strategy that makes the difference. Having Hannah Schmitz there and making some perfect calls and having a driver like Max who maximizes things, it helps. And then the weekends where you have to nail it, and then the wheel-to-wheel battles. Lando can improve if McLaren is significantly quicker, he's going to win the championship. I don't think that's going to be the case, but if it's close, I think Max nails it again. It's going to go down to the wire. I think this one is going to be much closer. So yeah.
So you don't think Liam Lawson's going to have a Ricardo Vettel 2014, no? No.
I think we're looking
Nobody
at
Liam is under explicit instructions not to take points off him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would imagine so, yeah.
I mean, we had a Kiwi on this podcast in the last time around, and even he was not willing to say that. So, yeah.
His exact words were, "Why does everyone think I'd support people from my own fucking country?"
Yeah. Sorry.
Nationalism is dead.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so Max, and you think Lando, Dr. Obbs?
Yeah, I'm the only Lando stan on this podcast.
I've been hurt before.
Please, yeah.
Look, ideally I would have picked Leclerc, but the biggest problem for me is Ferrari. I think there are two things that are going to hold Leclerc from the championship. First is Ferrari, second is Lewis. Because there will be races where Lewis will have to cede position to Leclerc and he's not going to do it. And Ferrari is not, and Fred is not strong enough to actually make him do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, honestly, I couldn't give a shit who wins. I just hope, like 2024's ending, we get
goes to the last
things.
That's all I want.
No, just one thing I loved in 2024 was every single weekend when someone said who's going to win this weekend, it was like, I haven't got a fucking clue.
Yeah.
And it has been a long time since I felt that way in Formula One. And if we get that for an entire season, I couldn't give a shit who wins, honestly.
Yeah.
Just that all season. Yeah.
Yep.
That'd be amazing.
True.
Cool.
Yeah. Dr. Obbs, thanks for being here. I mean, I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. It was great. Good fun. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank
really
you for
appreciate it. I don't think we got too crazy either. So it was pretty muted. Not too bad.
We'll have you on next time, maybe ramp things up a bit. We were just on our best behaviors.
I think it's hard to go a bit too wild when you're talking about technical stuff. When you start bashing drivers, that's when it...
Yeah, exactly.
Guys, if you're watching this, please do check out the link in the description below to Dr. Obbs. I will link your podcast and your ex as well down below.
Yeah. Do give him a follow, and if possible, if you're basically a Dr. Obbs fan, do give us a follow and a subscription. Thank you.
I would, if I'm honest.
If you're a Dr. Obbs fan only. No. Yeah, definitely
only
give
if you're
these guys a follow for sure. Really good content from both of them for sure.
But I think like last week when we had Josh on, I would say most of the people watching this probably already are subscribed or following you, so it doesn't matter.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Take it easy.